Hi, my name is Karim Rafa. I'm here with Arun, CEO and founder of Leonie Hill. Welcome to Coffee and Conversation. It's a pleasure to have you, really a pleasure. Before we get too much into this, can you just tell me a bit more about yourself, Leonie Hill especially, and the sort of tech you invest in?
Okay, Leonie Hill Capital we founded 16 years ago. It's one of the largest PE and venture firms in Singapore. And we started our journey with Alibaba Investments and Tencent and Baidu Investments. And 16 years back with PayPal and SpaceX.
So can you tell me more about what you think of the economic feasibility of space exploration and where there's opportunities?
So we think that the private sector is going to lead in development of launch vehicles and also the satellite communication technologies and security technologies. And it's also going to help in improving the basic infrastructure needs like disaster controls and disaster management, and also how to improve the agriculture, crop yields, and manage the food supply scenarios and shortages.
It does seem like all of the tech is somewhat evolving either to improve space exploration on one hand, but also just the miniaturization of quite important tech, like video capture in the case of, I guess, forecasting weather and optimizing crops. What else in that space are you seeing? I mean, economic feasibility of, say, nano satellites, smaller satellites, cheaper payloads?
Yes. So as many players come into the picture, you will see the launch cost go down from current about $50 million a launch to about maybe 10 or $5 million a launch. Then you will have more smaller satellites into the orbit. And also we should concentrate on the satellites which are going to expire or end of life, to not be put on just the graveyard orbits, but to recover them so that we don't clutter the space with too many satellites.
There are a lot of technologies coming up about space cleaning as well. Is that anything you've looked into?
Yes, we have looked, but it's very difficult because the satellites can be as small as the size of a tennis ball and as big as a car. And a micro, a 1 millimeter or 2 millimeter clutter of space metal can destroy a satellite.
So with all things space exploration, when we've seen this in the movies and we've also seen this historically, it's always quite a gamble and a high-risk investment on one hand, but I'm pretty sure there's also a high return. What do your investors expect? What do you expect as an investor?
It's not a gamble. When you bet on a technology, you need to understand that there will be some failures, but you need to bet on a team which can deliver the technology. Because space exploration is not something new. We did it years ago, landing man on the moon. But after that, there was a pause. So the technology is available. Now we are perfecting that technology, making it cheaper, making it reusable.
Is there some way as a VC or as an investor that you can also profit from the side effects per se?
Positively, a good question. In fact, medical technology is a byproduct of space exploration. So there are a lot of scientific experiments being done on the space station.
These are intentional experiments, right? And I feel like more often than not, these were accidental discoveries on the way. The MRI machine not being one of these, right? I think that was also...
Yes, you're right. So accidental in the means, it's... you see, when you go in space, there are a lot of unknowns, right? And then you have to be creative enough to find a solution. And most likely those solutions will come back to be a very useful solution for putting the technologies into aerospace, for example, and for safety in planes, and so on.
Are there certain areas of space exploration that you're looking into, say, in the more popular sense, such as going to the moon again, space tourism, things that Virgin Galactic are doing, for example?
So, yes. So we are first having a lunar lander program, but that's for exploration to the Mars. So it's a first test bed for us to go to the moon. And then that experiment, if it succeeds, that vehicle will be launched to the Mars.
All those things being quite interesting. What is the purpose, though, to go to Mars after the moon? What's coming after that? What is the long game?
The long game first is we have to know who else is there in the universe, and also explore, can we find things which can be useful for us as a supply chain scenario. As Earth get depleted of resources, can we find something in these planets which can be useful for us long term? And also the technology of communication, right? So if you can look at how communication works from Mars or Moon to Earth, that means if you solve that problem, you'll be able to easily solve current problems of your cell phone not having a proper reception in your hotel room. And we push the boundaries, right?
Yeah.
So SpaceX or any other exploration in satellite technology or imaging technology, we are always pushing our boundaries.
Yeah, SpaceX did have that a model, I believe, for using their rockets for Earth travel, right? So going into low orbit, I believe, and then landing again on a different continent in much shorter flight periods.
Correct. So, but the first stage of is that you must have heard about a technology called Hyperloop.
Yeah.
So I think before we jump into a suborbital flights, Hyperloop is an easier solution for people to transport. For example, DC to New York, it will take 18 minutes to travel. And from San Francisco to New York, it will take an hour and 20 minutes.
So with the birth of SpaceX, Rocket Lab, and much more independent space operators to launch especially smaller satellites into space, as well as getting government contracts in the case of SpaceX, how are these independent operators changing the space as opposed to just having government-led agencies?
So we believe strongly that the governments are very slow to innovate and to bring down the cost. And when it goes to a private enterprise, the first innovative technologies come into play, and they are commercially more focused to make money. So the only way you can make money is to have reusable technologies. For example, SpaceX has reusable launch vehicles. That's one. But if you look at the newer technologies coming up in the satellite field, is a technology where you can extend the life of the current satellites.
It's definitely value add right there.
Value add there.
Yeah.
So that gives a lot of the smaller players more capabilities to innovate and disrupt the current big players who are interested in just making a $400 million satellite, but not looking at satellite which can last 10 years because of the payload issues.
It's like in the startup ecosystem as it is, a lot of companies are trying to disrupt major government processes as it is. And I feel like in space it's very similar. SpaceX had an issue back in 2015, I believe, where they found that they weren't allowed to bid on government contracts and military contracts, and ended up suing the government and winning the right to put GPS systems into space for the military. Is that right?
Yes.
This somewhat hostile environment, I guess, is still very much there from older players.
Yes, positively, because remember that if you have a government establishment, they will always fight for their dominance. So space was dominated by big players, only government-backed players.
And there's still very much government regulations in place that say
Positively.
you can do this,
Yes.
you can't do this.
Yeah. So we have to live within the regulation, but since US NASA has no launch capabilities now, so they have to depend on SpaceX.
Singapore has put $3 billion into advanced manufacturing and engineering, some of it in space, some of it in other sectors. Does Leonie Hill see some points of investment there?
Positively. In fact, we have collaborated with a French company recently. You'll see in the press announcements where they are bringing the advanced manufacturing to Singapore. So it's just, you see, space technology is not related to satellite or launch vehicles, but the same technology can be used for advanced aircrafts, reducing the overall weight of an aircraft, making aircraft more safer and cheaper. So it's all good, and also advanced manufacturing brings in less dependence on manpower. So Singapore, being a small nation, it doesn't have to depend on manpower like any other country. They can have lesser of qualified manpower to develop the same infrastructure.
Well, Arun, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Pleasure.
That was
been
it.
A pleasure.
Thank you for being on Coffee and Conversation. Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much.